This week on Government Matters.
This is going to make a very big competitor for CACI, but there is a lot of consolidation coming in that market.
Reuters reports Leidos is close to a $5 billion merger with Lockheed's IT shop. How will the Pentagon react?
We're really looking for them to create the right kind of team that can go ahead and meet all 16 of the objectives that are in the RFP.
The First Responder Network Authority wants proposals by the end of April. The goal? Deploy a public safety broadband system nationwide.
The nature of transitions have changed drastically. They're much bigger, they're much more complex, and they're much more dangerous than ever before.
The Partnership for Public Service wants to help presidential administrations pass the baton. Government Matters starts right now.
From ABC 7 and News Channel 8, this is Government Matters.
To our viewers around the world on the American Forces Network and here in the nation's capital, thanks for joining us. Government is the engine that runs this city. That's why Government Matters. Every week we'll bring you the top headlines in tech, security, and management. I'm your host, Morris Jones. A coalition of U.S. and Iraqi forces have made significant gains against ISIS over the past few months. The next target is Mosul. It's the second largest city in Iraq. But before that operation can begin, more U.S. trainers are needed on the ground. Barbara Starr explains.
There may be up to 10,000 ISIS fighters keeping an iron grip on Mosul, Iraq's second largest city. Now, hundreds of additional U.S. and coalition troops could soon be nearby.
The reason we need new trainers or additional trainers is because that's really the next step in generating the amount of combat power needed to liberate Mosul.
The U.S. and Iraqi government calculate 24,000 highly trained Iraqi forces are going to be needed to dislodge the terror group and retake the city. Defense Secretary Ash Carter urging other nations to contribute more troops at a Paris meeting. But while the battle for Mosul looms, ISIS is working to build a new power center in Libya. A senior U.S. defense official tells CNN fighters are increasingly going there when they can't get into Syria, and others are traveling there from Syria to avoid coalition airstrikes. In November, the first U.S. airstrike against ISIS in Libya killed Abu Nabil, a senior operative. CNN has learned the U.S. is privately pressing the allies to consider new action against hundreds of ISIS fighters now in Libya, even as more continue to stream in. The U.S. is already looking at more drone operations.
The threat in Libya, the classic failed state, is growing by leaps and bounds. In essence, what ISIS has done is they've transferred their operations from Syria and Iraq into Libya.
The U.S. doesn't think ISIS will fully abandon Syria, but the worry now, ISIS will make a grab for Libya's oil because the organization needs cash. Newly released video shows the U.S. bombing this ISIS money storage site near Mosul, the 9th time cash sites have been hit. Tens of millions in currency destroyed, the U.S. believes. ISIS is now moving money around to smaller, more dispersed sites. And in what appears to be a leaked document issued by ISIS, the group says it's cutting the salaries of its fighters in half. The statement reads, no one is excluded.
If you don't pay the troops wander off.
Barbara Starr reporting. Meanwhile, it's been a stunning month of activity for the Obama administration, Secretary of State John Kerry in particular. After years of grinding negotiations with Tehran, the floodgates have opened. Jim Sciutto has the latest on a prisoner exchange that almost collapsed.
Jason Rezaian in the first video since his release seen laughing with his wife.
Happy. You made the happy place.
Still, Amir Hekmati, the first of the freed Americans to speak, says their detention ended only after one final night of fear and uncertainty.
Up until the last second, we were all worried and concerned. We were just put in a very small room and we had no telephone or access to any information. We kept being told that we're going to be taking off in 2 hours, and 2 became 6, became 10. So a total of almost 2.5 days was really nerve-wracking.
Brett McGurk, the American diplomat who negotiated the Americans' release over 14 months of secret talks, told us the first sign of trouble that evening was when he and his team could not locate Rezaian's wife and mother.
That was actually very concerning, so we stopped the whole thing.
Turns out they were being held on their own without any communication in a part of Tehran's airport controlled by the military.
I said, no, I said, you know, the entire thing is off unless they're on the airplane.
You would have killed the deal if Jason's mother and wife were not on that plane?
Well, part of the deal, Yege Rezayan was in the deal. So that's part of the deal, period.
And do you think the Iranians at that point were trying to change the terms? What were they trying to do?
It's unclear. I mean, I think, look, there's a lot of people in the Iranian system and the people who hold the keys to the prison cells that never wanted this to happen.
McGurk was not convinced the deal was back on until the Swiss ambassador, America's diplomatic representative in Iran, narrated the scene second by telephone.
He then was on the tarmac and described a van approaching the airplane, couldn't see in the windows, and the doors opened, and one by one he explained that it was Jason's wife, his mother, Jason, Amir, and Saeed, and described one by one getting on the plane, which was the key moment for us, and that was kind of the trigger for us. So I'll never forget his voice in my ear.
In fact, McGurk says the talks almost fell apart several times, including this moment in October, when McGurk, whose public role included only the war on ISIS, showed up unexpectedly at nuclear talks with Iran in Vienna. But again, hope disappeared.
And we did make a lot of progress with Zarif there. But then when I got back together with my counterparts, they kind of went back to square one.
Jim Sciutto. President Obama might have to go back to square one in his effort to keep millions of illegal immigrants from being deported. The U.S. Supreme Court says it will take up Obama's executive action on immigration this term, as Diane Gallagher reports.
The president's controversial executive action on immigration is going to court. The program allows more than 4 million undocumented immigrants whose children are U.S. citizens to apply for work permits and avoid being deported temporarily.
We've got a strong argument to make, both in terms of the legal ground on which we're operating, but also in terms of the practical impact, positive impact, that these executive actions will have.
The president laid out his vision back in 2014.
You'll be able to apply to stay in this country temporarily without fear of deportation. You can come out of the shadows and get right with the law. That's what this deal is.
But so far, that hasn't happened. 26 states filed a lawsuit blocking it from taking effect, accusing the president of abusing his power by going around Congress. Now, the Supreme Court will hear the arguments in April and would likely issue its ruling in June. That's just before the conventions, in the middle of the presidential campaign season. No matter what that ruling is, the outcome of the election could impact the future of the program.
The window of time that people have to come forward is much more narrow. And the big if is the fact that this is a temporary program. A new president, whether it was Democrat or Republican, could very well cancel this. And there's so much confusion in the immigrant community over what to do.
In Washington, Diane Gallagher reporting.
In tech matters, Lockheed and Leidos. This week, Reuters published an exclusive report about a deal that could send shockwaves through the federal IT marketplace. Leidos is close to a $5 billion merger with Lockheed's IT shop. If finalized, it would create the largest government services provider in the country. Joining me with the latest is Andrea Shalal, correspondent for Reuters. Andrea, let's start with the basics. What exactly is a government services provider?
Government services providers do the business of government that the government doesn't have the bodies to do. So they do planning, they do purchasing, they do logistics, they do all those functions, and they basically provide the butts that sit on the seats to do the work.
All right, well put. So if Leidos merges with Lockheed's IT shop, they would become the largest government services provider in the U.S. You write, the deal will put Leidos on stronger footing to cope with lower government spending, increased competition, and delays in new contracts. All right, it all makes sense, but what about Lockheed? How would this merger impact them?
Well, for Lockheed, this is the second of two large transactions. Last fall, they took over Sikorsky aircraft, which made them even bigger than they already were. They're already the #1 supplier in the government, to the Pentagon. And so there were some concerns that they might be getting too big. At the same time, Lockheed is really focusing more on that hardware, whether it's helicopters or fighter jets or, for that matter, very high-end combat ships. So what they've decided to do is to get out of the lower margin business that is this government services business and focus on the hardware.
All right, with all these big money projects, all the military hardware, is this a risky move, do you think, for them?
You know what? I think it's a question of focus. So in earlier years, these big defense contractors got bigger and bigger and bigger, and they took every piece of the market that they could get. I think Lockheed's strategy now is to focus on this sort of high margin business. And although the government services business has been a good one over the years, the margins are lower there. And so for Lockheed, it was purely a decision of getting out of a business that is dragging their overall margins as a corporation down. They have said that they liked this business and they didn't necessarily want to get out of it, but the margins made them do it.
Now, Leidos wasn't the only contractor to submit an offer for Lockheed's IT shop. CACI did too. Now, if the deal goes through, will CACI suffer?
You know, this is going to make a very big competitor for CACI, but there is a lot of consolidation coming in that market. There are a lot of separate, disparate players. And, you know, basically experts expect that there will be a larger wave of consolidation in the services business. I wouldn't be surprised at all if CACI purchases or merges with another company in coming years to get to that bigger scale that Leidos will have now.
Before you go, I'm curious, how do you think the Pentagon will view this merger?
Well, you know, that's a very important question. Actually, the Pentagon was not too happy about Lockheed's takeover of Sikorsky because what they were concerned about is that too much power is concentrated in the hands of too few players, and they're worried about them using, basically exerting undue influence on their primary customer. So the Pentagon's chief weapons buyer, Frank Kendall, is actually working on some legislative language that would give the Pentagon additional tools to question such mergers, in addition to the sort of classic antitrust questions that are addressed. From what I hear, I think that there probably won't be too much objection to this merger simply because they know the margins are a strain for the companies and they have to get to a bigger critical mass to actually make some money in this sector. But it'll be interesting to see what happens once the merger is announced. We're expecting that on Tuesday.
Yep, we'll stay on top of this too. Nice reporting, by the way, with your exclusive report on Leidos. Andrea Shalal, correspondent for Reuters. Thanks again.
Thank you.
We'll turn from tech to security straight ahead on Government Matters. The final RFP is on the street. I talk Spectrum with FirstNet President TJ Kennedy next. In security matters, the next step for FirstNet. This month, the First Responder Network Authority issued its final RFP for the deployment of a nationwide public safety broadband network. Proposals are due by the end of April. The agency expects to make an award in the fourth quarter of this year. For more, I'm joined by TJ Kennedy, president of FirstNet. TJ, refresh our collective memory. What is FirstNet and why was it created?
FirstNet was created as an outcome of the 9/11 report to really focus on making sure that police officers, firefighters, and paramedics all had access to interoperable communications.
Now, you issued a final RFP or request for proposals last week. What exactly are you looking for?
We are looking for a partner to come forward and offer to FirstNet to handle all of the key objectives for public safety that they need in a nationwide network that will be able to handle voice, video, and data to help support the life-saving operations that they perform each day.
Now, there's a lot at stake here. We're talking billions of dollars and 20 megahertz of spectrum. Tell us more about those two elements. Is there a price tag on this RFP, and how will that spectrum be used by the winning company or companies?
The very unique thing about this RFP is it takes together a number of things that were put into the act to make sure that public safety would be sustainable as they were to execute both the deployment of this network and the maintenance of the network. The three things come together as the funding that was put forward with spectrum to be sold, which is part of the $7 billion in funding that FirstNet was delivered. Part two is really driving the fact that we have 20 megahertz of spectrum that we will operate in for the public safety network, but also needs to be leveraged and leased to bring in value that will help drive the capacity and coverage that first responders really need. And the third part is user fees so that the network will be sustainable over time and not require other outside funding.
TJ, for obvious reasons, this network needs to be secure. How does cyber factor in here?
Cyber is one of our key 16 objectives of this network and is a key component to ensure that public safety both has cyber that is very usable, they're able to utilize the network in a very straightforward way, and also secure, since both medical records for the EMS personnel and law enforcement and other key databases will be accessed by other public safety personnel, need to be secure at all times.
Now, we cover a lot of contracts on government matters. To a great degree, FirstNet is unique. Your agency is literally building something out of thin air. Is that a scary process?
I think it's a challenging process, but it's also a great opportunity. We've been able to attract amazing personnel, both technical and business-related backgrounds that have come together to make sure that public safety and the key public safety needs are met through a unique partnership that will come together through this RFP to leverage the spectrum that has been provided and also make sure that we have the coverage and capacity to meet the needs of public safety 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
Now, earlier I mentioned that proposals are due by the end of April. What are you looking for from tech and telecom companies?
We're really looking for them to create the right kind of team that can go ahead and meet all 16 of the objectives that are in the RFP. These 16 objectives together are what will be evaluated for the best value solution that will really help meet first responders' needs across the country.
So much has changed from the TV shows we'd see from the 70s and 80s, Emergency, 1 Adam 12, where we had police, fire, communicating. Now we've got an entire country and world, for that matter, that needs more spectrum. You also a second ago mentioned the need for video. This is more than just walkie-talkies and first responders talking. They need to see what they're talking about as well, right?
Absolutely, and this is really geared to be a broadband data network, a wireless broadband network. And with that, we expect to really have law enforcement and police officers across this country, firefighters and emergency medical technicians, leverage the power that video can bring them along with situational awareness data so that they can be both safer in their job, more effective, and more efficient to be able to do more with less as they move forward to leverage technology that is available here in 2016.
TJ Kennedy, president of the First Responder Network Authority. Thanks and good luck, TJ.
Thank you, Morris.
Well, FirstNet isn't the only group with its nose to the grindstone in 2016. The Partnership for Public Service will spend President Obama's final months in office working to ease the transition to a new administration. We'll turn to management matters straight ahead. In Management Matters, the Center for Presidential Transition. That's the name of a new organization just launched by the Partnership for Public Service. The goal is to create a single place to store knowledge about the handoff between administrations. That way, new presidents don't need to start from scratch. For more, I'm joined by David Eagles, Director of Presidential Transition at the Partnership for Public Service. David, this effort gets underway in earnest this April. What's the plan?
So the plan is to be the central source, as you say, for transition planning. You know, the nature of transitions have changed drastically. They're much bigger, they're much more complex, and they're much more dangerous than ever before. And things have changed even from 8 years ago, so we're trying to respond to that. We're trying to start early, and we're trying to talk to the campaigns about getting set up early around transition planning.
You also compiled a presidential transition guide. It's about 200 pages and includes key documents like a memorandum of understanding between administrations and a how-to guide for presidential appointments. How should presidential candidates use this information?
Well, I think first is to just start early, to understand that we not only have a guide, but we also have an online platform which they can come to that houses all the files from the Bush transition and from the Obama transition and from the Romney transition, because it's important to think about it that way. If your candidate has a viable chance of winning, you need to start planning for transition. This is why we ask that they get set up in early April with their transition leadership in place by May.
You've attracted some big names to your advisory board. The list includes Joshua Bolten, Clay Johnson, Ted Kaufman, Michael Levitt, Mac McClarty, and Donna Shalala. Collectively, they represent the past 3 administrations and former GOP nominee Mitt Romney. What role will they play in this launch?
So they'll play a critical role. I mean, I think what the partnership is trying to do is convene the relevant players around transition. And if we want to change behaviors, we need this surround strategy of folks who've done this before, who have experienced this before, match them with people who are trying to solve complex issues, which is what we're trying to do here at the center. And ultimately, we can expect much better results around the transition this go around.
Last May, we hosted Dan Blair, president of the National Academy of Public Administration. He's leading a project called Transition 2016. Here's an excerpt from that interview.
and we're going to be providing the thought leadership necessary to provide the campaign and transition teams with basic information upon which they can form their policy initiatives. The third leg of this is the political appointee project, and we're working with our partners Ernst & Young in identifying the toughest positions in government and providing profiles of those holding those positions and updating them.
David, that sounds similar to what you've outlined. Are you in competition with NAPA?
No, not at all. I mean, I think we view ourselves as the hub of transition planning from beginning to end, and we're working closely with the candidate staff and with relevant players like the National Association of Public Administrators. They're a critical part of our strategy, so they're plugged into our network, and collectively we're going to come to the transition teams with the support.
You know, we're still in the early primary stages. We've got the caucuses going on. It's hard to imagine that we're already planning a transition for a new presidency. Why is this so important right now?
Well, it's critically important if we want better service from our government, if we want government to perform effectively, and this is what the partnership is all about. It really starts at transition. And when you look at the results of how new administrations have gotten started, they haven't gotten their people in. Take 200 days after the administration is set up, you have less than 30% of your leadership in place. The fact that these folks are not executing on their policies, their campaign promises on day one, they're not doing this because they're not planning early enough, and this is what we're really trying to get out there. If they do set up in April, they get started in May, June timeframe, we're confident that results can be drastically different and they can get off on the right foot and execute what they promised.
Good deal and good luck. David Eagles, Director of Presidential Transition with the Partnership for Public Service. Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Actor Kevin Spacey plays President Frank Underwood on House of Cards. He's also a budding tech investor and the new ambassador of WiseKey, a cyber company that secures digital identities. Spacey hit the ground running this week with various TV interviews. Can't say I'm surprised. There are two types of cyber ambassadors, doormats and matadors. Which do you think he intends to be? That's all from Washington. I'm Morris Jones. We know your week is filled with other matters. Save this half hour for us.